The New Testament reading today is taken from 1 Timothy, and it's chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. You may find this in your Pew Bible on page 1847. Listen to the word of the Lord. I want men everywhere to lift up holy hands in prayer, without anger or disputing. I also want women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. The Old Testament reading today will be found in Proverbs chapter 31, verses 10 through 31. And you may locate this in your Bibles on pages 1032 and 1033. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand, she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed and is clothed in time in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the reward she has earned, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. So ends the word of the Lord.
I don't remember who it was, but somebody who showed up early this morning said, "Oh, Pastor, you went to get into a whole lot of trouble this morning." And I admit that preaching on Proverbs 31, especially as a male pastor, is filled with all sorts of landmines that you could step on and have explode on you. And if John had not stopped reading at verse 10 of the Timothy passage, we could have really had, lit the fire of discussion in this sermon this morning. So I'm glad John stopped at verse 10. This morning, we will conclude our 6-week sermon series on the book of Proverbs. During this series, we discovered that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We then found out that Gaining wisdom is a lifelong adventure. It's not just you study the lesson once and now you have wisdom. It's an ongoing event. Later, we also learn that when we trust the Lord with all our hearts and lean not on our own understanding, He will make straight our paths. Then we discussed how Lady Wisdom is crying out for attention and is in plain sight. But often we don't hear Lady Wisdom because there are so many other voices out there competing for our attention that unless we are looking for Lady Wisdom, we do not hear her voice. And then last week, we read how a good name is better than riches, and how wealth has the ability to sprout wings and fly away. Those of you who were looking at the $1.6 billion Mega Millions jackpot last Tuesday night might have woke up Wednesday morning and discovered that indeed that money sprouted wings, and instead of flying to Saratoga, Wyoming, moved to South Carolina. I guess that $1.6 billion thought that it did not want to deal with the bitterly cold winters that Wyoming is famous for. Today we will look at the closing verses of the book of Proverbs. The teacher is closing this book with the praise to the good wife, who is hard to find. Before going into details, I want to take just a few moments to give a little bit of background information. First, like some of the other Old Testament poetry that we look at, this epilogue to Proverbs is written in the Hebrew language in an acrostic style, which means that the first line starts with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and continues in alphabetical order from there, with the second line being the second letter, etc. There are two explanations as to why a poet might use this style of writing the poem, since obviously it's a very difficult style to write. The first reason is that perhaps the writer is trying to portray that he or she is going to cover the topic of this poetry in its totality. We might be saying in the United States that the poet would be covering the topic from A to Z. The other reason why the poet might be using the acrostic style is that using that style would aid in people memorizing the poem. The other tidbit that I discovered during my research the past couple of weeks is that even today, many Orthodox Jewish husbands on the evening of the Sabbath, on Friday night basically, will recite this epilogue from Proverbs as a reminder to him of how valuable a good wife really is. While this poem is antiquated, I am sure that with a few modifications to accommodate the fact that we are no longer in the United States an agrarian society, we can see that this passage will provide lessons for us that can be applied in our modern lives. The opening verse of this passage has been interpreted many different ways. Verse 10 in the NIV talks about a wife of a noble character. Other translations say the excellent wife, a virtuous wife, a worthy wife, or even a capable wife. The literal translation of the Hebrew here would read a strong wife. The Hebrew word used here is the same language that Boaz uses back in Ruth 3:11, when he declares to Ruth how everyone at the city gate knows of Ruth's good character. Needless to say, if we were going to accurately translate the Hebrew here, we would have to probably use a very long run-on sentence that has all of the words that the different translations have. Unfortunately, this is poetry, and if we did that, we would ruin the meter of the poem. That's why I don't deal with poetry too much. Meters and rhyming, not my thing, but I'm glad the Lord has blessed other people to write in poetic forms. The opening verse also ends with the teacher lamenting about how hard it is to find such a woman, and then continues his praise by saying that such a woman is worth more than rubies or fine jewels. Indeed, finding a spouse who is of strong character may be difficult to find. I often hear some of the younger women complain about how hard it is to find a good husband. Now, as we read in Proverbs, a good husband may be hard to find, but so is a good wife. Those of us gentlemen who have a good wife indeed have something that is far more valuable than rubies or any other fine jewels. Then as we move on to verses 11 and 12, we read how a good wife inspires total confidence in her husband and brings nothing but good to him. As we look at the statistics concerning how many marriages end in divorce today, and I did a quick look this week, depending on what source you want to look at, 40 to 50% of all marriages end in a divorce. We can see that our society today has a hard time in the husband and wife matchmaking business. Now, there is no way I'm going to intend to put the entire blame on the wife. After all, that would be suicidal, and also it would violate what the teacher here is saying. The teacher here is not trying to put any blame on wives. Instead, this poem is intended to bring praise for the good wife and to instruct her husband on how to honor the good wife. Then in verses 13 through 20, the writer lists all of the competencies of a good wife. She is a hard and competent worker. Notice she selects the wool and the flax and then works these raw materials into clothing. She is also a wise person in selecting fields, and then after buying those fields with her own money, she plants vineyards. One thing that may be easy for us to overlook is that the vineyards in the Old Testament time were never planted on fertile land. Instead, they were planted along the rocky cliffs where only the grapes could grow. And of course, planting along the cliffs means that this woman is putting in some pretty hard labor. Indeed, the good wife is a hard worker. We also see that her arms are strong for the work. Her trade is profitable, and her lamp never goes out. In other words, this good wife is a tireless woman. In verse 15, it indicates that she gets up in the pre-dawn hours to provide food for the family. However, once again, our English translations are sort of downplaying the work that this good wife is doing when she wakes up early in the morning. She wakes up early in the morning to find prey for the meals for the day. Now I know some of the gentlemen here are avid hunters, and that's great. And if we look at verse 15, how the Hebrew would interpret it, if there are any ladies in this congregation who are good hunters as well, you would be matching the description of what the teacher said the good wife does as they get up early in the morning to find the food to feed the family. Finally, in verse 18, we see that she works late into the night. I know that there's a famous quote that often gets bandied about how a woman's work is never done. This section of Proverbs is confirming the truth behind this statement. The good wife has work that seems to never end. As we drop down to verse 23, we see that the good wife also makes her husband look good at the city gates. As mentioned in previous sermons, the city gates were where commerce and city government act transactions took place. Looking good at the city gates was key to a man having a good name. The good wife's conduct is one that reflects positively on her husband. Later in this epilogue, we will see that the converse is also mentioned. A good husband should also make his wife look good at the city gates as well. In verses 26 through 28, we see that the good wife is being praised for her ability as a household manager. First, she is a lady who speaks with wisdom and faithfully instructs her children. Now, I know in our modern society with a public school education system, many people tend to think, oh, it's no longer the parents' responsibility to instruct their children. That's what the public schools are for. However, my 28 years as a teacher in a public education system would say that that premise is a bit off base. Yes, the schools and the teachers are responsible to instruct their children on various subject matters. However, the parents, and I would say even the grandparents, can play a vital role in their children's education. The parents should be teaching their children proper behavior and proper etiquette. Within a couple of weeks when I was a teacher, within the first 2 weeks of school, I had a pretty good idea which students of mine had good parental support back home and which ones did not. Even in today's society, once again, it is important for the parents to be actively involved in their children's education. And I would say, since I'm looking around and I don't think any of us have children in the public school system right now, except maybe college, but for those of you who are grandparents, you can also aid in that role by stressing to your grandchildren the importance of education and proper behavior. In verse 28, we learn that the children learn to honor their mother and to bless her. Likewise, the good husband realizes the work of his wife and praises her for her good work. Husbands, we have a duty to praise our wives for the good work that they do. And then as we go to verse 31, we see the teacher repeat the instructions that the husband is to praise his wife. Notice that the last instruction in Proverbs is for the husband to give his wife the reward that she earned. And also we are to praise her at the city gates. I did a little bit of research this week, and there was a group called, I forgot the name of the group even, but it was an insurance group that tried to determine how much a stay-at-home mom would make if she got paid for all the duties that a stay-at-home mom performs. And they were saying that they estimate that a stay-at-home mom is worth about $60,000 a year. So, husbands, your wives are indeed valuable, and probably more valuable than jewelry. As we conclude this message, those of us who are married have an important task to do. We need to make sure that we honor and cherish our spouses. We need to make sure, we need to make sure that our actions reflect positively on them and that we honor them. When we do that, not only are we honoring our spouses, but we are honoring God as well. Amen. I would